was supposed to be a quiet visit. The State Department had assured everyone this was routine, just a regional consultation with African leaders regarding counterterrorism coordination in the Sahel. Standard, procedural, contained. But Kash Patel didn't believe in routine. He believed in pressure points, and today his target was Burkina Faso and its increasingly defiant president, Ibrahim Traoré. The convoy cut through the dust of Ouagadougou like a silver blade. Black SUVs, tinted windows flanked by local security forces, unsure whether they were protecting a guest or guarding a threat. Inside the lead vehicle, Patel scrolled through intelligence briefings. Traoré's speeches are gaining traction, his aide muttered, especially the religious language. He's invoking faith in nearly every address now. It's starting to sound messianic. Patel didn't look up. Faith is what men use when they're out of options. He closed the file. Let's see what happens when that faith is tested. Inside the presidential palace, Traoré stood barefoot on prayer mats in the small adjoining chamber behind the diplomatic hall. The call to prayer had just ended. He remained still for a moment longer, eyes closed, breath slow. Then he rose, dusted off his uniform, and walked toward confrontation. The two men met under high ceilings and heavy air. Patel extended a hand, forced and polite. Traoré took it, firm, unreadable. "President," Patel began, "America appreciates your enthusiasm, but we're concerned about your shift in tone lately. Too much fire, not enough structure." Traoré smiled faintly. "Sometimes fire is needed to melt the chains." Patel chuckled. And that's when it happened. He leaned in, just enough to let the mask slip. "You talk about God like he's your general. But faith doesn't stop tanks, Mr. President, and prayers won't bring down drones." The room went dead silent. Traoré didn't move, didn't blink. Only his voice changed, quieter, sharper. "You're right. Faith doesn't stop drones, but it stops something far more dangerous." He stepped forward. "It stops fear, and that's what men like you can't fight." Outside, a sandstorm was forming, and inside, a very different storm had just begun. The silence that followed Traoré's words hung in the air like a blade suspended mid-swing. Even the translators didn't dare speak. Kash Patel smirked, not because he was unfazed, but because he recognized what had just happened. He'd touched a nerve. Good, he thought that was the point. "Mr. President," Patel said, adjusting his blazer, "I understand that faith plays a symbolic role here. But symbolism doesn't protect borders. Strategy does. Intelligence does. We do." Traoré remained seated, but his stillness was deliberate, composed, coiled, like a lion that didn't need to roar to be feared. "Is that what you offer Africa?" he asked. "Protection in exchange for obedience?" Patel's smile flattened. "We offer stability." "No," Traoré replied. "You offer dependency." Later that night, the palace guards reported unusual drone movement above the capital. American-made, unarmed, they claimed. Just surveillance. But in Ouagadougou, there are no such things as just drones. Aminta, Traoré's top advisor, entered his office with a warning in her eyes. "The American envoy isn't here for diplomacy. Patel's team is mapping infrastructure, fiber lines, power grids, military compounds." Traoré didn't look surprised. "Then they've already decided what they'll do when we say no." "You still want to give the speech tomorrow?" she asked. "More than ever," he said, "because they came here thinking we fear what flies above us." He paused, then looked up. "But we fear only what we kneel to." Across town, Patel was on a secure call with Langley. "He's more dangerous than we thought," said a voice on the line. "Not because of weapons, because of belief," Patel exhaled slowly. "Then we don't challenge him in public. We isolate him in silence, leak old military photos, question his faith, push internal doubts. Africa doesn't need another martyr, and it needs confusion. And if that doesn't work?" Patel's answer came cold and clear. Then he'll learn what happens when faith meets strategy. But Traoré wasn't praying for safety. He was preparing for war, the kind that doesn't start with bullets but with silence. The next morning, the square outside the National Assembly was already full. No concerts, no banners, no food trucks, just people, thousands of them, standing silently facing the grand steps where President Ibrahim Traoré was set to speak. They weren't called there, they weren't paid. They came because they felt something rising that no aid package could buy: dignity. In the palace, Aminta watched the crowd from the second floor. "They know something's coming," she said, "even if we haven't told them yet." "They've known for years," Traoré replied quietly. "They were just waiting for someone who didn't flinch." He turned from the window and walked toward the courtyard, where microphones waited, and foreign eyes watched. From a hotel rooftop nearby, Kash Patel observed through binoculars. "He's going through with it," one of his team muttered. "Of course he is," Patel replied. "That's what martyrs do." A U.S. journalist next to him asked half-jokingly, "So what's your move if he turns this into a global anti-American sermon?" Patel didn't laugh. "I make sure the world stops listening before he finishes." At the podium, Traoré didn't raise his voice. "They say faith cannot stop drones," he began, "and maybe they're right. But drones don't raise children. Drones don't defend culture. Drones don't rebuild nations." He looked out at the crowd, then upward. "We are not shielded by missiles. We are shielded by meaning, and meaning lives in faith." He didn't name Patel. He didn't have to. "To those who come with contracts and cameras, let this be clear. We are not negotiating our soul." The square remained silent, not from fear but reverence. They mock what they don't understand, but we know what moves people to stand when it's easier to kneel. That afternoon, Western media outlets rolled out a coordinated response. Traoré's faith-fueled regime raises concerns. Radical rhetoric or rising star? U.S. officials alarmed by growing anti-West sentiment in Sahel. It was a smear campaign disguised as analysis. But online, a different story surged. "He did not flinch faith over fear." Traoré, speaks for as Patel, saw the trend, and for the first time in weeks, he hesitated. That night, Ouagadougou didn't sleep. The city pulsed with something that couldn't be described, not quite tension, not quite triumph. In the narrow streets, people spoke in whispers and firelight. In mosques and churches, prayers rose like smoke. Not for fear, but for clarity, for strength, for peace without surrender. Inside the presidential compound, Traoré met with his closest circle. Aminta laid down a dossier. Black seal, no official stamp. Anonymous source from within Patel's security detail. Documents suggest an American-backed initiative to reshape Burkina Faso's leadership, if necessary, through internal destabilization. Colonel Dow leaned forward. Code-named Operation Recast, military pressure, media leaks, divide the generals, break public trust. Traoré studied the document silently, then closed the folder. "They've moved from mocking our faith to fearing it." "And now?" Aminta asked. "Now we show them what it built." Elsewhere in the city, Patel was not in his hotel room. He stood inside a private intelligence hub, dark and buried under a false office building. Monitors lit his face. One screen showed heat maps of crowd activity. Another ran real-time sentiment analysis from African social media. "He's not just popular," an analyst said. "He's becoming untouchable, not because of weapons, because of belief." Patel didn't blink. "Then we fracture the belief quietly. No bullets, just seeds." He opened a secure line. "Start leaking rumors. Question his military credentials. Suggest he's exploiting religion to stay in power. If faith is his armor, make it look like a costume." "And if that fails?" the analyst asked. Patel turned. "Then we show him that even faith needs air, and we will take it from him." The next morning, doctored videos began surfacing online. Clips of Traoré allegedly praying with foreign militias, forged documents showing secret land deals, claims he was building a personal theocracy. But the people weren't fooled, not because the lies were weak, but because their belief was stronger. One student posted, "Even if it's true, at least he believes in something." Unlike them, another wrote, "The man they mock is the man we needed, and now we're unafraid." Kash Patel stared at the data spike. Why isn't it working? He asked no one in particular. But deep down he knew. You can kill a leader, but not the reason they were followed. It was Friday, and in Burkina Faso that meant more than rest. It meant rhythm. The rhythm of worship, of tradition, of things older than strategy memos and diplomatic cables. As sunlight hit the palace courtyard, President Ibrahim Traoré stood barefoot on the warm stone. No stage, no cameras. Just him, a prayer mat, and the quiet hum of a nation that still knew how to listen. Patel watched from a drone feed. "He's praying in public," he muttered. "It's not a rally," one of the intelligence officers replied. "It's not even on the schedule. He just walked out and knelt down." "Why?" Patel asked, as if trying to understand an alien culture. "Maybe," the officer said, "because it's Friday." But it wasn't just a prayer, it was a message. One more powerful than any speech. Because Traoré wasn't talking to the people. He was talking for them. And in doing so, he did something Patel and his team hadn't anticipated. He stripped fear out of faith. Across the capital, thousands followed suit, in mosques, in homes, even in cafes. They stopped, they knelt, they closed their eyes. It wasn't protest, it wasn't defiance, it was unity. Later that day, Western media twisted the moment. Burkina Faso leader stages religious spectacle amid political tension. Is Traoré building a cult of personality through worship? Experts warn of faith-driven authoritarianism in West Africa. But the audience was no longer in the West. It was in Nairobi, Accra, Caracas, Jakarta. And they weren't buying it. A Nigerian journalist tweeted, "You mock his faith, but when your leaders lie, steal, and disappear, what do you follow?" That evening, Aminta entered Traoré's office holding a satellite printout. "They've increased aerial surveillance. American drones now sweep near our northern border every 3 hours. They want us to react," Traoré said, "and we won't? Not with fear." He looked down at the photo. An aerial image of himself praying in the courtyard, taken from thousands of feet above. "They see everything from above," he said, "but still don't understand what holds us up." Kash Patel closed his laptop in frustration. He came to destabilize a man. Instead, he had awakened something older and far more dangerous to empire. The world was beginning to notice. Traoré's speeches were no longer just circulating in African capitals. They were being translated in Sao Paulo, dissected in Istanbul, played in underground forums in Jakarta. And everywhere the clips landed, one thing became clear. This wasn't just politics, it was doctrine. A doctrine of dignity without apology, of resistance grounded in belief, of a continent no longer waiting for permission to define itself. In Washington, an emergency committee meeting was held at the National Security Council. Patel stood before a half-lit screen displaying data, hashtags, engagement rates, faith sentiment trends. "He's doing something we've never seen before," Patel said, jaw tight. "He's using religion not to divide but to unify, across borders, across ideologies." A military aide leaned forward. "So what's the play?" Patel's voice dropped. "We make his faith look corrupt. We manufacture betrayal. If his people stop believing in him, everything else collapses." The plan was simple. 1. Leak falsified intelligence suggesting secret deals with foreign arms groups. 2. Plant stories of luxury living and religious hypocrisy. 3. Fuel suspicion among his generals. Erode belief, one doubt at a time. But in Ouagadougou, Traoré was already one step ahead. He gathered regional religious leaders, Muslim, Christian, even indigenous spiritual elders, for a private meeting. They will try to turn our beliefs against each other, he warned. So we must stand not just in faith, but in fellowship. One imam nodded solemnly. They know the power of our prayers, but they don't know the power of our unity. That week, a new video surfaced from inside Burkina Faso. It wasn't from the government. It was from a village elder in the north. They said the president prays too much. We say a man who kneels before God will not kneel before anyone else. The clip exploded across social media, faster than Patel's planted stories ever could. Back in Washington, frustration boiled. The operation to discredit Traoré was unraveling. Every seed of doubt Patel planted was met with something he didn't understand: faith that had already been tested. Patel leaned back in his chair. "We came to silence him," he muttered. "Instead, he's teaching them to speak." They underestimated the land. They always had. To Washington, Burkina Faso was a zone of instability. To Patel, it was a chessboard, tribes, factions, terrain. But to Traoré and his people, it was something else entirely: sacred. And now it was speaking. In the village of Bobo Dioulasso, elders gathered under the baobab tree and performed a ceremony not seen in years, asking the ancestors to bless a leader who dared to put faith before fear. In the streets of Ouagadougou, murals of Traoré and prayer appeared overnight, not as propaganda, but as offerings. And in nearby Niger, a protest erupted outside the U.S. Embassy, not violent, not organized, just students holding signs, "We believe because he does." Patel watched the images flicker across screens in the embassy safe room. "This is no longer political," one State Department officer whispered. "It's spiritual." Patel didn't respond, because deep down he knew, you can kill a movement. But what do you do when the soil itself starts resisting you? Meanwhile, Traoré was preparing something far more disruptive than a military response: a continental broadcast. A call not to arms, but to spirit. "If they attack our faith, we will not retaliate with force," he told Aminta. "We will retaliate with clarity." She blinked. "What does that mean?" "We remind the world who we are, and who they never were." The broadcast went live across Africa, Latin America, parts of Asia. Traoré stood without uniform, without title, dressed simply in white. Behind him, no flag, just the horizon. "They say we pray too much. We say they've never known peace. They say our belief is weakness. We say it is the only reason we're still standing." He didn't name Patel. He didn't need to. "We are not a project. We are not a crisis. We are a people with memory and with faith." In Washington, Patel threw the remote across the room. "Cut the cables, pressure the platforms, do something." But it was too late. The signal wasn't just digital, it was ancestral. Washington didn't hold press conferences on this one. No official statements, no clarifying memos, just quiet panic. The kind that happens when a narrative is no longer yours to control. Inside Langley, Patel sat in a sealed debriefing room with 4 senior analysts. One of them opened with what no one wanted to say out loud: "We've lost the perception war." "It's not about troops," another added. "It's not about aid. It's about who gets to define what power looks like." Patel leaned forward, fingers locked. "So what now?" Silence. They had dossiers. They had drones. They had dollars. But none of that worked when your opponent didn't want to be in your system, and worse, had taught others they didn't have to be either. In Burkina Faso, the people no longer waited for orders. Teachers opened lessons by quoting Traoré's address. Young men painted phrases like, "Faith is armor," on abandoned colonial buildings. Even soldiers once trained under American advisors began removing foreign patches from their uniforms. And through it all, Traoré said nothing, because he didn't need to anymore. Aminta entered his office holding a thick manila envelope. "Intercepted transmission," she said. "Looks like Patel's final play. Covert operatives, disinformation campaign targeting religious leaders, divide the faith from the revolution." Traoré took the file, read it slowly, then he looked up. "They still don't understand. They think we believe because I tell them to." "And you don't?" she asked. "No," he said calmly. "I tell them because they already believe." That night, a short film appeared online, produced not by the government but by local artists. It showed images of colonial ruins overlaid with words from Traoré's speeches. It closed with a single sentence: "He prayed for strength." And the world mistook it for weakness. It went viral across the global south. And even in New York, a young black student played it in class and whispered to her friend, "They tried to humiliate his faith. Now it's carrying a continent." Back in Washington, Patel received the report: public opinion unreachable, narrative collapse, faith held, no target remains. His team waited for his response, but Patel just closed the file, stood up, and walked out. Patel was gone. No formal reassignment, no statement, no scandal, just gone. The same man who mocked faith from behind a smirk and a suit had vanished from the headlines he once orchestrated. Some said he returned to a quiet role in private intelligence. Others claimed he was moved to a black site program in Asia. No one really knew. But in Ouagadougou, no one was watching him anymore. They were watching themselves. Colonel Dow arrived at the presidential palace with satellite photos in hand. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't afraid either. "Last of the American drones pulled back 36 hours ago, he said. Aminta raised an eyebrow. "Voluntarily. Or, they realized they couldn't read a people who don't speak in the language of fear anymore." Traoré placed the photo down. "Empires don't leave when they lose power," he said. "They leave when they lose meaning." Across the continent, something strange was happening. Young leaders in Uganda and Senegal began referencing the Burkina model. A theologian in Kenya called it post-colonial monotheism, where belief and governance weren't enemies but allies. In São Tomé, soldiers repainted an old military barracks with the phrase, "The revolution knelt first." It wasn't branding, it wasn't propaganda, it was testimony. In a quiet press room at the UN, a reporter dared ask a question no one had voiced in years. "Does the West still define what legitimacy looks like?" The panel froze. The moderator coughed. The question lingered like incense. Back in the palace, Traoré lit a single candle. Not for ceremony, not for performance, but because it was Friday again. And faith, unlike empire, does not expire with the news cycle. "They thought faith made us weak," he said to Aminta, staring at the flame. "And now?" she asked. He smiled, not with pride, but with peace. "Now they pray we don't teach others how strong it really is." The sun rose slow over Ouagadougou, golden and quiet. There were no jets in the sky, no foreign motorcades at the gates, no analysts pacing embassy floors with contingency memos, just a country that had endured without apology. Inside the Grand Assembly Hall, leaders from across Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia gathered. It wasn't a summit designed in Brussels. There were no official logos, no blue lanyards, only a name handwritten on the agenda: Voices of the Uninvited. Traoré didn't take the central podium. He stood to the side, among farmers and teachers and poets, the people Patel once classified as non-state actors. "For years," Traoré began softly, "they said belief was dangerous. They were right. Belief is dangerous to those who rule by fear." He looked around the room, his voice steady. "Empires tried to shame our faith. They couldn't. They tried to fracture our unity. They failed. And now they retreat, not because we fought them with weapons," he paused, "but because we refuse to let them define who we are." Applause didn't erupt. Instead, heads bowed, eyes closed. The room became something sacred, not political, spiritual. In the back, a Western journalist scribbled notes, unsure how to frame what she was witnessing. No slogans, no flags, just people gathered around something the West had always tried to ignore. Conviction that didn't need validation. She finally wrote, "This isn't rebellion, it's rebirth." Later that night, Traoré walked alone into the old military chapel behind the palace, a crumbling space once used by French officers. No guards followed. No aides accompanied him. He lit a candle, knelt slowly, and whispered, not a demand, not a command, but thanks. Somewhere in a private home in Virginia, Kash Patel watched a clip of the gathering on a muted screen. He didn't sneer. He didn't speak. He just sat back, staring at a world that had slipped beyond his grasp, not through force, but through faith. And as the screen faded to black, one phrase echoed from Traoré's voice, "You mocked our prayers, but they made us ungovernable." He thought it was just prayer. He thought kneeling meant weakness. He thought faith was something to mock, something you could discredit with a smear campaign or crush with a drone. But what Kash Patel didn't understand was this. Faith isn't a strategy. Faith is a fire. It doesn't need your validation. It doesn't ask for your permission. It survives quietly, steadily, until the moment the world tries to erase it. And then it burns. Traoré never shouted. He never retaliated with missiles. He didn't build a wall or draft a treaty. He simply refused to kneel, not to Patel, not to foreign powers, not to a system that believed belief was a liability. And in doing so, he taught millions something they weren't supposed to remember. You can't colonize a soul that knows who it belongs to. You can't govern a people who believe in something greater than fear. And you can't silence a prayer once it becomes the voice of a nation. He was mocked, and that was their mistake.